The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing like a distant warning. The store was alive with movement, yet every step echoed emptiness. Shelves stacked high with products created narrow aisles, but the real weight wasn't in the merchandise. It was in the air, thick with fear and hesitation. Employees moved like shadows, glancing over their shoulders, eyes darting at supervisors who patrolled with the silent authority of unchecked power. And then, a sound broke through the rhythm, a soft, trembling cry. Faint but unmistakable, the CEO, hidden under a cheap hoodie and a baseball cap, froze. The sobs came from the back near the janitor's closet and the restroom. His heart tightened not from shock, but from recognition of pain he had ignored in the past. He followed it, careful not to be seen. There, crouched behind a mop bucket, was a young woman, her uniform damp from tears, hands pressed against her face. She tried to stifle the sobs, shaking violently, but the anguish poured out anyway. She was one of the lowest paid employees, the kind nobody noticed, yet she carried the weight of the store on her small shoulders. Managers walked by oblivious, or worse, intentionally blind. One of them, a burly man with a permanent scowl, barked instructions at another worker. The crying went unnoticed. Until now, the CEO blood boiled. How many times had he read reports, checked numbers, and thought all was well, while here in the quiet corners, lives were being crushed. The sound of her pain wasn't just a cry. It was a warning, a signal that the system was failing spectacularly. He knelt beside her without speaking. The woman looked up, startled, thinking he might be another enforcer, another person with the power to punish. But there was something in his eyes, a calm fury, a promise that someone finally saw. She trembled, gripping the edge of the mop handle like it was her lifeline. Behind them, footsteps approached. The burly manager appeared, yelling at her for being lazy and incompetent. His voice echoing through the aisle like a hammer striking steel. Her shoulders sagged further, humiliation and fear paralyzing her. The CEO felt his fists clench. He didn't wait. In that moment, he made a decision. No more reports, no more distance. He would uncover the truth, every abuse, every manipulation, every hidden injustice in this store, in this company. He would see it all with his own eyes, feel it himself, and when the time came, he would act. The young woman's sobs quieted slightly as she sensed his presence. There was a flicker of hope in her eyes, a dangerous, fragile hope, but it was enough to ignite a fire in him. The CEO straightened, pulled the hood tighter, and disappeared into the aisles, ready to walk the corridors of fear, ready to expose the rot, ready to confront the men and women who believed their authority could crush the human spirit without consequence. And somewhere deep in the fluorescent, lit maze of aisles, a silent battle had begun. The first 40 seconds of a war that would shake the foundations of the company. The CEO stepped back into the store the next morning, hood pulled low, blending into the uniformed crowd. The fluorescent lights buzzed above like the heartbeat of a building built on control and fear. This time, he was not looking for tears. He was looking for truth. The aisles seemed ordinary at first glance, but the silence was deceptive. Whispers darted like shadows between the shelves. Employees avoided eye contact, glancing nervously at supervisors who paced with quiet menace. Each nod, each frown carried unspoken consequences. In this place, fear was currency, and he intended to see how it flowed. A commotion near the electronics section caught his eye. A manager, a woman with sharp features and a voice that could cut steel, was berating a young cashier. "Do you think this is a game? Do you think mistakes won't cost you?" Her words slashed the air. The cashier lowered his gaze, hands trembling, face pale. The CEO heart tightened. These weren't minor mistakes. They were human beings being punished for surviving a system that rewarded cruelty. He moved closer, pretending to browse, ears tuned. The manager's scolding was methodical, almost rehearsed, as if she thrived on the subtle terror she instilled. Other employees gathered at the edges, silent witnesses, frozen by fear. The CEO noted every detail, every word, every glance. Then, near the back door, he spotted a different kind of abuse. A security guard, clearly overworked, was being forced to lift heavy boxes well beyond his capacity. Another manager sneered from above, barking orders while hiding behind the safety of his desk. "Faster! Do you want this shift to cost you your job?" The man strained, gritting his teeth, sweat dripping down his face. No one intervened. Not HR, not anyone. Everyone knew the unspoken rules, look away or suffer. The CEO pulse quickened. He had known there were problems, but this was a web of control he hadn't imagined. Every corridor, every aisle, every shadow held a story of oppression, manipulation, and fear. Then, a whisper of something worse reached him, a rumor that rogue management had called in outside enforcers, local cops, to intimidate employees who dared speak out. The CEO jaw tightened. This wasn't just internal rot. It was a system that used power and authority to maintain silence. He followed a trail of subtle clues, a discarded report, a hurriedly hidden security camera, the terrified glances of those passing by. Every observation painted the same picture, a machine designed to suppress, humiliate, and control. In the restroom, he found her again, the young janitor from yesterday. She recognized him immediately, fear sharpening in her eyes. I didn't know," she stammered, trying to hide behind the mop. But this time the CEO spoke. Not words of reprimand, but a quiet reassurance, a silent promise. He wasn't here to watch. He was here to act. And act he would. Over the next 48 hours, he would map every corner of this corrupted kingdom, uncovering not just rogue managers, but a network of silent complicity. HR ignoring complaints, supervisors manipulating schedules, security enforcing fear. Every detail brought him closer to the storm he would unleash, a reckoning that would tear apart the hierarchy of terror and rebuild it from the ground up. As he exited the restroom, hood still low, eyes sharp, he realized something terrifying. The system had grown strong, and exposing it would not be easy. But watching her trembling, seeing the silent desperation of every employee he passed, he knew he had no choice. Justice demanded courage, and he was ready to wield it. The shadow of control hung over the store like a storm cloud, but somewhere inside, a fire had been lit. A fire that would not be ignored, not by managers, not by cops, not by anyone who thought fear could rule. The store had never felt more suffocating. Every aisle, every corner whispered secrets of control, and the CEO moved through them like a hunter in his own jungle, unseen yet fully aware. He had spent the past few hours tracing patterns of abuse, monitoring who wielded power, who suffered silently, and which employees were quietly loyal but terrified to act. Near the back of the store, a confrontation erupted. A group of employees huddled near the stockroom, speaking in hushed voices. Two rogue managers stood above them, their shadows long and menacing, enforcing rules nobody had written. One barked, "I don't care what the schedule says. You're staying until this shipment is done, and don't even think about reporting this HR won't help you." The young janitor, still trembling from the previous day, tried to step aside, clutching her mop like a shield. Her hands shook, and tears threatened to spill again. That's when she noticed him, hood pulled low, eyes scanning, unflinching. Recognition sparked in her chest, a mix of fear and hope. The managers noticed, too, their expressions sharpening, suspicion flaring. "Who's that?" the burly one demanded. "You don't belong here." His voice carried authority, a mix of anger and self-assured dominance. The CEO didn't answer. He stepped closer, calm, measured, but his presence alone shifted the room. And then the first clash happened. One of the managers, thinking intimidation would silence the employees, reached for a security radio. Within seconds, two local cops appeared, not uniformed officers, but hired enforcers meant to maintain the manager's oppressive grip. They advanced, believing they controlled the scene. The CEO didn't flinch. "Stop," he said, his voice low but unmistakable. The command carried weight far beyond what his hoodie suggested. Every head turned. Confusion flickered in the eyes of the rogue managers and the enforcers alike. "You've been abusing these people for too long," he continued, stepping forward. "Every threat, every punishment, every unjust rule, it ends now." The burly manager laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "And who are you to say that? You're just another." His words trailed as he realized the CEO presence was no accident. There was authority in the way he moved, a quiet ferocity that made the room hold its breath. One of the enforcers lunged toward the janitor, attempting to intimidate her further. In a fluid motion, the CEO intercepted, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting, forcing him to stumble back. Employees gasped, some frozen, some daring to peek from behind shelves. The power dynamic was shifting, rapidly and dangerously. The managers backed away, their confidence cracking. The CEO advanced, recounting every act of cruelty he had observed over the past 2 days. Lying to HR, threatening staff, using fear as a weapon. Every single one of you is accountable. He pulled out the hidden camera footage, replaying moments of intimidation and abuse. The enforcers, once certain of their control, faltered as undeniable proof of their misconduct played on a small screen he had connected to his phone. The employees' eyes widened with astonishment. They had feared reporting, feared consequences, but now truth was visible, undeniable. Tension hung like electricity in the air. Every step, every glance, every whispered command had been a piece of the puzzle, and now the CEO had begun assembling it in front of them all. For the first time, the oppressed felt the stirrings of hope, the hint of liberation. The janitor wiped her face, taking a shaky breath, realizing that this man, unknown in disguise, was her chance at justice. And the CEO, scanning the room, knew this was just the beginning. The rogue managers would not yield easily, the enforcers were dangerous, and the system had deep roots. But for the first time, the balance of power was tipping. A storm had begun in the aisles of the store, and by the end of this day, no one would leave unchanged. The store had shifted. What was once a quiet, suffocating maze of fear had become an arena of tension, every aisle a potential battlefield. Employees peeked nervously from behind shelves, some daring to straighten their backs for the first time in months. The CEO moved through the corridors with calculated steps, scanning every corner, every face, every posture. The managers who had once ruled with cruelty now felt a weight pressing down upon them, subtle but undeniable, a presence that could not be ignored or challenged. Near the electronics section, he stopped by a stack of boxes, pretending to adjust inventory. His eyes, however, never left the employees. He observed whispers exchanged over hurried tasks, subtle glances between workers, the unspoken fear that had ruled the store for years. And then he saw it, a pattern of abuse, meticulously hidden in plain sight. The night shifts were regularly overbooked, breaks were denied, and pay discrepancies had been quietly enforced by the manager's subtle manipulations. He pulled out his phone and discreetly recorded snippets of conversations. You know the rules. One manager hissed at a young cashier, "One mistake, and HR won't help you, remember that." The cashier's hands shook as she fumbled with a scanner. Every word, every tone, every subtle threat was evidence of the tyranny he had suspected. The janitor, now standing a few steps behind him, whispered, "He's going to hurt us, or worse." Her voice trembled, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. She had begun to trust him, not just as an observer, but as a force capable of righting the wrongs that had consumed the store. And then, it escalated. One manager, growing desperate, called for the enforcers again. Two men with the air of authority, badges that didn't belong to any legitimate force, and a sense of control they had long relied upon to intimidate. They strode down the aisle, their boots heavy on the polished floor. "Step aside," one barked voice cutting through the murmurs like a whip. The CEO stepped forward, calm, measured. "Leave them alone," he said. His tone carried authority, not from uniform or title, but from the certainty of justice. The enforcers hesitated. Authority unearned often falters under truth. The first enforcer lunged toward a terrified employee. In a swift motion, the CEO intercepted, gripping his arm and forcing him off balance. The confrontation was fluid, almost balletic. A single strike, a push, a subtle twist. But it sent a clear message: he would not allow intimidation to continue. The room froze, hearts pounding, breaths caught in throats. The managers whispered frantic orders, but their voices no longer carried the fear they once commanded. Employees began to inch forward, emboldened by the CEO presence, emboldened by the realization that someone powerful actually saw their suffering and was willing to act. Then came the most damning evidence: the hidden surveillance feeds, the HR reports never filed, the pay stubs altered to cover favoritism. The CEO displayed them on his phone, passing it along to a cluster of employees. Shock rippled through the store like an electric current. Years of silent oppression, of small injustices compounded into a mountain of fear, were now exposed in bright, undeniable light. Tears welled in the janitor's eyes as she saw proof of what she had endured, proof of what others had suffered in silence. It's true, she whispered. No one believed us. No one ever believed us. The CEO eyes hardened. No more silence, he said. From this moment, everything changes. Every unjust rule, every hidden threat, every act of cruelty. It ends today. I will not allow fear to govern these aisles any longer. The rogue managers froze, realizing that the tide had shifted irreversibly. The enforcers, once confident in their intimidation, now hesitated, unsure whether to fight, flee, or surrender. The employees, emboldened by the display of truth, straightened their shoulders, ready to reclaim dignity stolen for far too long. A storm had begun in the store, and while the first strike had been made, the battle was only beginning. Every corner held secrets. Every manager had complicity to answer for, and the CEO knew that exposing the rot was just the first step toward reclaiming justice. The fire of resistance had ignited in the hearts of the oppressed, and as the CEO moved through the aisles, eyes sharp and resolute, the whisper of hope grew louder. In that moment, the store, once a prison of fear, began to feel like the arena where courage, truth, and justice would finally clash with tyranny. The air in the store was electric, thick with fear and anticipation. Every employee who had cowered behind shelves and counters now dared to look up. Their eyes met the CEO, wide with a mixture of awe and desperate hope. He had stepped into their world of oppression, but he would not remain a silent observer any longer. The managers, sensing their authority slipping, grew frantic. You think you can just walk in here, and one began, but his voice faltered under the CEO's unwavering stare. The enforcers, muscular and intimidating, advanced with calculated menace, trying to reassert control over the employees. The CEO moved first, fluid and precise. A shove, a twist of the wrist, and one enforcer stumbled into a display of canned goods, the clatter echoing like a gunshot. The room froze, every breath suspended. Back off, the CEO said, voice low but firm. You are done threatening these people. A second enforcer lunged, attempting to grab the young janitor. The CEO intercepted instantly, using the man's momentum to hurl him against a shelving unit. Employees gasped as the enforcer fell, stunned, his authority shattered. Fear had shifted. Power no longer belonged to the tyrants. It was moving back to the people. The managers tried to rally, screaming orders, but the CEO had already anticipated their moves. He stepped into the center of the aisle, raising his voice for the first time, clear and commanding. Enough. Every rule you've used to terrorize these employees is over. Every threat, every punishment. They end today. The janitor, trembling, took a tentative step forward. Others followed. The cashier, who had been cornered yesterday, the stockroom worker, who had hidden under boxes, even the quiet night shift clerk, all emerged, their collective courage amplified by the CEO presence. They were no longer victims, they were witnesses to the reckoning. One manager, desperate, reached for a hidden phone, presumably to call reinforcements. The CEO eyes narrowed. Trying to summon fear again, he said, "It won't work." With a swift motion, he grabbed the device, snapping it in half. The room was silent, tension thick enough to choke on. Then came the proof, the damning evidence of years of manipulation, abuse, and deceit. HR reports never filed, pay stubs altered, employee complaints buried. The CEO displayed everything, moving from aisle to aisle, confronting each rogue manager with their crimes. Each revelation elicited gasps, whispers, and some tears. Employees who had been silent for months began to speak, confirming the abuse, recounting small injustices that had been invisible to the world. The enforcers realized their intimidation tactics had failed. They backed away, uncertain, eyes darting, muscle tension ready for confrontation, but their confidence shattered. One even attempted a final shove toward the CEO, but a swift block and a pivot sent him sprawling into a display of electronics, the crash a deafening punctuation mark to his arrogance. Every action by the CEO was measured, precise, and purposeful. He wasn't just fighting for control. He was teaching the employees that courage could overpower fear, that truth could dismantle tyranny. The managers, realizing their power had evaporated, paled. Some cowered, others tried to negotiate, but the writing was clear. The CEO was in command now. The janitor's tears had stopped, replaced by a tentative smile. Others followed, daring to breathe again, daring to stand tall. For the first time, hope replaced fear, courage replaced submission. Yet, the CEO knew the battle was far from over. Rogue managers still lurked in offices, corruption ran deep, and outside enforcers could strike again. But the first strike, the symbolic, empowering, liberating strike, had been made. A storm had been unleashed in the store, a reckoning that would ripple far beyond these aisles. And at the center of it all, the CEO eyes burned with purpose. No abuse would go unanswered, no employee silenced, and no tyrant would remain unchallenged. The store had transformed into a battlefield of silent tension. Every aisle was a stage for confrontation, every shelf a potential witness to justice being served. The CEO, hood still low, moved like a predator observing prey, eyes scanning for the next act of oppression. He had seen the manager's fear, the enforcer's faltering confidence, and the employees' tentative courage. But the war was far from over. In the stockroom, two managers huddled, whispering frantically into radios. They thought they could call in reinforcements, summon more enforcers, or manipulate the system from behind locked doors. They did not realize that their every move was being tracked, their every whispered plot exposed to the man who had walked these aisles in disguise. The CEO approached silently, noting every detail. A security guard stood near the back door, arms crossed, clearly intimidated by the managers. The guard's hesitation betrayed years of coercion and fear. The CEO stepped closer. "You've been forced to choose obedience over conscience," he said, voice calm but piercing. "Now you have a choice, follow me or continue the cycle of oppression." The guard's eyes widened, realization dawning. His loyalty had been bought with fear, but fear had been broken in an instant. He nodded slightly, understanding that standing with the CEO meant standing with truth. Suddenly, one manager, desperate to reassert control, lunged toward a clerk hiding behind crates. "Get back to work," I said now. The CEO reacted instantly, intercepting with precise force. He twisted the manager's arm behind his back, forcing him to kneel. The enforcers froze, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. The employees watched stunned as tyranny was confronted head-on. The CEO moved methodically, confronting each rogue manager with evidence of their crimes. Pay discrepancies, falsified reports, harassment records, all displayed in stark, undeniable detail. The managers' confident postures crumbled as the truth hit them like a hammer. "This stops today," he said, voice echoing across the aisles. "No more lies, no more fear, no more abuse." The janitor, standing a few steps away, watched with a mix of disbelief and awe. For months, she had endured humiliation and intimidation, her pleas falling on deaf ears. Now, she saw justice incarnate. A man willing to risk confrontation, willing to challenge the system, willing to fight for them. Tears welled, not of sorrow this time, but of relief and hope. Then came the next wave of chaos. A group of enforcers, realizing the manager's grip had slipped, charged toward the CEO and employees, attempting to regain control. The CEO movements became a blur, dodging, redirecting, striking with calculated precision. Each enforcer who lunged was met with resistance, their arrogance shattered by his skill and authority. Employees ducked and ran, guided by his presence, escaping threats that had seemed unstoppable only moments before. The managers screamed, their orders futile against the rising tide of courage. Employees, emboldened, began to reclaim their spaces. Shelves, once places of silent labor, became fortresses of defiance. The CEO strategy was simple yet effective: expose, confront, empower. Every act of abuse was countered, every enforcer neutralized, every employee emboldened. By the time the chaos subsided, the store was transformed. Tyranny had been shaken, fear replaced by tentative strength. The managers, humbled and broken, were isolated. The enforcers, defeated and intimidated, retreated into the shadows, aware they could no longer dominate. The janitor approached the CEO, trembling yet standing taller than she had in years. I didn't think anyone would ever stand up for us," she whispered. He nodded, eyes sharp, understanding that the battle was not just about physical confrontations. It was about restoring dignity, justice, and hope. And even as calm returned to the aisles, the CEO knew this was only the beginning. Deeper corruption remained, hidden in offices, payroll records, and HR files. The war against oppression was far from over, but for the first time, employees knew that someone powerful had seen them, understood their suffering, and was willing to fight for justice. A fire had been lit inside the store, and it would burn until every trace of fear and abuse had been destroyed. The CEO, hood still low, moved toward the next aisle, prepared for the battles yet to come. The aisles of the store had grown quiet, but the calm was deceptive. Employees whispered in corners, heads down, glances darting at one another like sparks in a tinderbox. The managers who had ruled with fear were reeling, but the CEO knew the war was far from over. Beneath the surface, deeper corruption festered. Hidden records, secret policies, subtle punishments that no one outside the store would ever notice. He moved silently, observing. The stockroom had always been a fortress for hidden misconduct. Boxes labeled with innocuous tags masked discrepancies in payroll, items stolen, and hours manipulated. A clerk's trembling hands betrayed the secrets he had been forced to keep. The CEO crouched beside him, voice calm but firm. "Show me everything," he said. The clerk hesitated, glancing nervously toward the office where the most ruthless manager lurked. Now, the CEO insisted. Fear met trust, and slowly, the clerk began revealing the hidden files, each more damning than the last. Meanwhile, a manager in the office noticed the CEO moving through the stockroom. Panic flared. He grabbed a phone, dialing numbers with frantic urgency, calling in more enforcers, hoping to intimidate or regain control. The CEO eyes caught the movement, and without hesitation, he intercepted, blocking the office door and preventing reinforcements from entering. The tension in the air thickened, every breath heavy with anticipation. Then came the confrontation. The manager emerged from the office, face red with rage, pointing fingers. "You have no right," he shouted. "This is my store. I run it." The CEO gaze didn't waver. "You run fear, not this store," he replied. "And fear ends today." The manager lunged, attempting to shove an employee out of the way, but the CEO was faster. A swift block, a push, and the manager stumbled back into a display of cleaning supplies, the crash echoing through the aisles like a gunshot. Employees gasped. For months, they had hidden in fear, but now they saw the tyrant falter. Courage stirred in their hearts. A group of enforcers, called in by the frantic manager, stormed the store. The CEO stood his ground, calculating each move. One enforcer attempted to grab a clerk, but the CEO intercepted, twisting the man's arm and sending him stumbling into a shelf. Another lunged from the side, only to be sidestepped and knocked off balance. The aisles became a choreography of precision, every move calculated, every strike purposeful. The janitor and other employees, inspired by his actions, began to step forward, reclaiming their spaces. They blocked enforcers from advancing, shouted warnings to colleagues, and even assisted in subduing those trying to intimidate them. The CEO wasn't just fighting alone. He was turning the oppressed into active participants in their own liberation. Then came the final revelation, the manager's secret office. Hidden behind a false wall, files detailing bribery, falsified HR complaints, and systemic manipulation were stored. The CEO accessed the records, revealing them to the employees. Shockwaves rippled through the store. Every stolen hour, every manipulated paycheck, every hidden act of intimidation was laid bare. Employees whispered in disbelief, "It's all true. Everything she said, everything we feared." The janitor's face glistened with tears, a mix of relief and anger. "We weren't crazy," she murmured. "We weren't imagining it." The CEO voice cut through the murmurs, steady and commanding. "No more hiding, no more fear. You will not be silenced. Every manager responsible will answer." Every enforcer complicit will leave, and this store will never allow this again. The storm was far from over. Managers still plotted, enforcers lingered, and systemic corruption had roots deeper than anyone had imagined. But the first major victory had been won. Courage had been rekindled, oppression had been confronted, and the employees finally had a leader willing to fight alongside them. As the CEO surveyed the aisles, watching employees cautiously reclaim their dignity, he knew that this battle would continue, that every shadow held another secret, but also that hope now burned brighter than fear. The tide had turned, and the war for justice was fully underway. The fluorescent lights of the store flickered as if sensing the storm that had erupted within its walls. What had once been a place of silent suffering, of whispers and fear, now buzzed with tension, anticipation, and the first glimmers of rebellion. The CEO moved through the aisles like a force of reckoning, eyes sharp, every step deliberate, scanning every corner for the tyrants who had spent years crushing lives with subtle cruelty. The rogue managers had regrouped, sequestering themselves in the main office. Their whispered conversations crackled through hidden intercoms and the occasional glance at surveillance cameras, attempting to regain control. "He's just one man," one hissed. "We can overpower him." Another manager, more cowardly than cunning, shook her head. "He's different. I've never seen anyone move like that before. He doesn't hesitate, he doesn't falter, he knows everything." Panic had begun to erode their confidence. Meanwhile, the CEO had gathered a small contingent of employees, the ones who had dared to step forward during the previous confrontations. The janitor, still trembling but emboldened, walked beside him, flanked by the night shift clerk and a timid stockroom worker who had secretly documented every abuse. They moved silently, yet each carried the power of truth, evidence of every injustice, every falsified record, every whispered threat that had tormented them for months. From the back room, the first enforcer appeared, attempting to intimidate a young cashier. The CEO reacted instantly. A shove, a twist, and the man stumbled back into a display of cleaning supplies. Cans toppled like dominoes, clattering to the floor, echoing like the first shots in a war. The employees froze for a heartbeat, then slowly began to breathe again. Courage was contagious. The CEO stepped toward the office doors, the headquarters of tyranny, and for the first time, he did not conceal his identity. His hood dropped slightly, revealing the determined gaze of a man who had watched too long, waited too long, and now refused to allow injustice to continue. The managers inside froze at the sight, their confidence draining. For months, they had ruled this store with a combination of fear, manipulation, and intimidation. And now, the one person who had the authority, courage, and skill to dismantle their control was standing directly in front of them. "You have controlled through fear," the CEO said, voice echoing through the office, measured but cutting, every word like a strike. "You have hidden behind rules and lies. You have thought that silence was consent, but it isn't. It never was." One manager sneered, attempting to regain dominance. "And what will you do? Arrest us? Fire us? You're just one man." The CEO eyes hardened. One man who knows the truth is more dangerous than 100 who hide behind lies. The confrontation escalated quickly. A manager lunged for the door, attempting to call reinforcements. The CEO anticipated the move, blocking the exit with precise agility. Another tried to intimidate the employees, but the workers, inspired by the CEO, stood firm, forming a protective barrier. The tide had shifted. Fear was no longer the currency. The battle turned physical. The CEO disarmed one enforcer with a swift motion, redirecting his momentum to push him into a shelving unit. Another manager attempted to strike him from behind, but a calculated pivot and controlled counter sent the assailant sprawling onto the floor. Each move was precise, a mixture of skill and calculated intent, demonstrating that courage, when combined with truth, could topple tyranny. Meanwhile, employees began reclaiming spaces that had been denied to them. The cashier who had been cornered for mistakes now blocked a manager's advance. The janitor moved confidently, guiding others to safety, her tears replaced by determination. For the first time in months, the oppressed were no longer powerless. They were participants in the reckoning. The CEO accessed the manager's hidden files, revealing bribes, falsified HR complaints, and schedules designed to punish. Employees gasped as evidence of manipulation, exploitation, and deceit spread across monitors and printouts. The weight of months, years of silent suffering became visible, undeniable, and actionable. Panic consumed the managers. Their shouts and threats rang hollow against the undeniable truth. One enforcer tried a desperate attack, but the CEO intercepted, subduing him with a controlled strike that left him sprawled on the floor, stunned. Employees rallied, restraining the others, emboldened by the clarity and justice that had finally arrived. By the time the CEO stepped back, the office was transformed. Tyranny had fractured. Fear had been confronted head-on. The managers, broken and exposed, cowered behind desks, while employees moved freely, reclaiming dignity stolen for far too long. Yet, the CEO knew the battle was not fully over. Deeper corruption remained hidden in payroll, HR, and company policies, ready to reemerge if left unchecked. The storm had begun, but the final victory would require strategy, courage, and relentless determination. The janitor, standing beside him, whispered, "We can actually be free now." The CEO gaze softened. "This is just the beginning. Freedom must be earned, protected, and defended. And today, we took the first step." A fire had ignited in the hearts of every employee present. A fire that would not be extinguished. And as the CEO prepared for the next stage of his campaign against corruption, one thing was clear. The days of fear and oppression were numbered, and justice was finally in motion. The store, now a battleground, still held secrets in its shadows. The rogue managers had been exposed, some cowering behind shattered authority, others plotting quietly, desperate to cling to control. But the CEO knew the rot ran deeper. He had sensed it. The subtle manipulations, the silent enforcers, the payroll tricks, and the HR files that had been buried intentionally. These were not isolated acts of cruelty. This was a network built to dominate, and it still thrived beneath the surface. He moved cautiously through the stockroom, noting the tension in every employee's step. Whispers of fear lingered, but they were accompanied by curiosity and hope. Eyes followed him, some timid, some daring. They knew he was not there to observe this time. He was there to dismantle the entire machinery of oppression. In the office, a group of enforcers had gathered, their eyes sharp, muscles tensed. They were hired to intimidate, to maintain order through fear, but now they hesitated. Something about this man, the CEO, was different. Calm yet fierce, calculating yet swift, he had already neutralized their initial attempts. They had learned too late that courage combined with knowledge could overpower brute force. The first enforcer lunged toward an employee, attempting to instill terror. The CEO intercepted, twisting his arm and pushing him into a shelf stacked with fragile items. Glass shattered, cans toppled, and the room echoed with chaos. But this chaos was controlled, precise, deliberate, a demonstration that power could be reclaimed when wielded with intent. Meanwhile, hidden evidence surfaced, payroll records altered, overtime stolen, HR complaints buried, all stored in a secret cabinet tucked behind a false wall. The CEO accessed the files, revealing the web of exploitation. Employees gasped, whispers turning to murmurs of disbelief. The janitor, standing close, realized the full extent of the abuse she had endured. Her tears flowed again, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of truth unveiled. A rogue manager, desperate to salvage control, attempted to rally the enforcers, attack him, take them down, he shouted. The enforcers hesitated, a fraction too slow. The CEO moved like lightning, intercepting each strike, redirecting momentum, disarming threats, and demonstrating that intimidation could no longer dominate. Employees watched inspired, their courage growing with every controlled movement. The battle spilled into the aisles. Shelves became barriers, displays became shields. The CEO leadership was evident not just in action, but in strategy. He guided employees, positioned them safely, and turned the tide of conflict into a demonstration of empowerment. Every enforcer who lunged found themselves countered, every attempt at fear neutralized. Then came the final discovery, a ledger detailing secret bribes, hidden schedules, and manipulations affecting not just the store, but regional operations. The CEO displayed the files to the employees, who were stunned by the scale of deception. Their suffering had been part of a much larger system, one that reached far beyond the aisles they walked every day. You see now. The CEO said, voice steady but commanding, this is why fear ruled. This is why silence was demanded, but it ends today. Every enforcer, every manager, every system built to crush you will be dismantled. Step by step, truth by truth, courage by courage. Employees began reclaiming their space. The janitor led others to confront managers with evidence in hand. Clerks blocked enforcers' paths, guided by the CEO calm authority. Courage had become contagious, fear waning with every controlled move, every revealed truth. By the end of the confrontation, the hidden network of corruption had been partially dismantled, but the CEO knew more lay ahead. Deep within HR, within regional oversight, the tendrils of abuse had spread too far for one day's victory to eradicate. Yet, the employees had been shown that courage, when combined with truth and leadership, could break the strongest chains. The CEO stood in the center of the store, surveying the aisles. Broken shelves, scattered files, overturned cart. Evidence of battle, yes, but also symbols of awakening. A fire had been lit, a force that would not be ignored. And as the remaining enforcers retreated into shadows, defeated but not yet eliminated, the CEO knew the war for complete justice had only begun. The next steps would require precision, strategy, and relentless courage. The hidden network would not surrender easily, but for the first time, the oppressed had a leader willing to fight, and hope now burned brighter than fear. The store had transformed into a war zone of truth and defiance. Broken shelves, scattered documents, and overturned carts bore witness to the day's chaos. Yet amidst the wreckage, a new energy pulsed, courage. The employees, once trembling in fear, now moved with purpose, guided by the CEO's steady presence. The tyrants who had ruled with intimidation were faltering, and the final battle for control had begun. The remaining enforcers, still lurking in the shadows, attempted to regroup. Muscles tensed, eyes darting. They advanced toward the employees with a sense of desperation. The CEO, standing at the center aisle, met them head-on. Step back, he commanded, his voice low and authoritative. This ends now. One enforcer, larger than the rest, charged toward a young clerk hiding behind a display. The CEO intercepted, twisting the man's arm and redirecting his momentum into a nearby shelving unit. Cans toppled like a wave of rebellion echoing through the store. The clerk's eyes widened in shock, then relief, realizing that fear no longer ruled. Another enforcer lunged from behind, aiming to intimidate the janitor. In a swift, fluid motion, the CEO blocked the attack, shoving the man aside. Employees watched, inspired, as their leader not only defended them, but turned the chaos into a lesson in courage. For the first time, they saw that the power of fear could be neutralized by precision, determination, and unyielding truth. The rogue managers, cornered in the office, tried one last desperate move, call backup, get more enforcers, one shouted. The CEO eyes narrowed. You've exhausted your options, he replied calmly. Every move you make, every lie you've told has been exposed. There is no hiding now. He accessed the manager's computer, revealing hidden emails, falsified reports, and records of manipulation that spanned months. The employees gasped as years of oppression, once invisible, became undeniable. The janitor's face glistened with tears, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of seeing the truth unveiled. Meanwhile, the enforcers attempted a coordinated attack, aiming to regain control. The CEO anticipated each move, countering with precision. Every strike was purposeful, every maneuver calculated. A push here, a twist there, an intercepted charge, all executed flawlessly. Employees began to take initiative, blocking enforcers, guiding one another to safety, reclaiming their space step by step. In the chaos, the young cashier who had been cornered weeks ago stepped forward, confronting a manager with documented evidence of harassment. The manager froze, shock and fear replacing arrogance. You can't, he stammered, but the CEO stepped beside her. Yes, we can, and we will. The janitor, now moving confidently among the aisles, helped other employees confront enforcers and managers, turning passive fear into active resistance. Each small victory added to a growing sense of empowerment. The employees realized that courage was contagious, and with the CEO leading, they were no longer helpless. The final confrontation approached. The main office where the last rogue manager and a pair of enforcers had barricaded themselves. The CEO moved deliberately, signaling employees to stay behind. He entered the office, eyes sharp, movements precise. The manager lunged for a phone, but the CEO hand shot out, smashing it to the floor. One enforcer charged, blocked, redirected, neutralized. The last man attempted to escape through a back door. Sealed and monitored by the employees now emboldened under the CEO guidance. Tension filled the air. The manager, realizing his control was shattered, sank to his knees, surrendering to the undeniable truth. "Please, we were just following orders," he whispered. The CEO gaze was steady, unwavering. "You enforced fear, you controlled through intimidation, and now you answer for every action. Justice begins here." Outside the office, employees cheered softly, a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. They had witnessed tyranny fall, corruption exposed, and fear dismantled. For the first time, the store felt like a place of possibility, not oppression. Yet even as the CEO surveyed the reclaimed aisles, he knew the battle was not over. Regional corruption, systemic policies, and subtle manipulation still lingered beyond these walls. But for now, the first major victory had been achieved. The enforcers neutralized, the rogue managers dismantled, and the employees empowered. The janitor, standing tall beside him, whispered, We really did it." He nodded, voice calm but resolute. "This is only the beginning. But today, you have taken your first step toward freedom. Fear has been confronted and hope has returned." The store, once a prison of silence, had transformed into a battlefield of truth. Broken shelves, scattered files, and overturned carts were not just remnants of conflict. They were symbols of courage, empowerment, and the undeniable fact that justice could prevail. And as the CEO prepared to take the next steps toward rebuilding the system, one thought burned clearly in his mind. Oppression could hide, but it could not survive when courage, truth, and leadership combined as one unstoppable force. The chaos of the previous battles had left the store physically damaged, but the deeper scars of fear and oppression were far more pressing. The CEO knew that dismantling tyranny was only the first step. True change required rebuilding, a system founded not on fear, but on accountability, empowerment, and transparency. He gathered the employees in the main aisle, the janitor standing beside him, the cashier who had once been cornered now holding a stack of recovered files. The CEO voice carried across the room, calm yet resolute. "Today we face the shadows. We exposed corruption, fear, and abuse, but we do not stop here. We rebuild, we restore, and we ensure this never happens again." Employees listened, some skeptical, some hesitant, but all inspired. Months, even years of silent suffering had taught them caution. But courage, once witnessed and nurtured, could not be ignored. Slowly, one by one, they began volunteering to help. The night shift clerk offered to organize files properly, the janitor suggested a new system for tracking grievances, and even the timid stockroom worker stepped forward to implement accountability measures. Meanwhile, the CEO focused on neutralizing the remaining rogue enforcers. Two had fled to an adjacent storage facility, hoping to regroup and intimidate employees remotely. Using evidence and strategic planning, he cornered them, giving them a choice: face accountability or remain powerless. The first, realizing resistance was futile, surrendered immediately. The second hesitated, but a controlled demonstration of authority, swift, precise, unyielding, forced compliance. Both enforcers were now neutralized, their threat removed, and their influence over employees permanently severed. Back in the store, the managers who had once ruled through fear were given an ultimatum: accept accountability and assist in restructuring, or face termination. Some reluctantly agreed, understanding that authority based on intimidation could no longer exist. Others were escorted from the premises, their reign of terror finally over. The employees began implementing the changes themselves. HR files were audited openly, payroll discrepancies corrected, and reporting channels established. No longer would complaints vanish into silence. Every concern would be heard, documented, and acted upon. The CEO oversaw the process, guiding without micromanaging, teaching without imposing. Leadership, he demonstrated, was about empowering others to stand tall, even in the face of adversity. Tension still lingered. Regional corruption, systemic policies, and hidden networks outside the store remained a potential threat. The CEO, aware that victory here did not guarantee peace beyond these walls, strategized for the broader battle. Surveillance systems were upgraded, records centralized, and communication lines strengthened. Every precaution was taken to ensure that fear could never regain a foothold. Amidst the rebuilding, emotional moments emerged. The janitor, once trembling and silenced, now led a small team in restructuring cleaning protocols, ensuring fair schedules for all. The young cashier, once cornered and intimidated, now guided new employees, sharing the lessons of courage and vigilance. Employees who had hidden in fear were now mentors, their confidence growing with every successful task. The CEO observed quietly, pride tempered by awareness. This victory was significant, but the system was still vulnerable. Change required constant vigilance, adaptability, and the collective courage of every employee. Yet for the first time, the store felt alive, not just functional, but thriving. Fear had been replaced by accountability, silence by voice, oppression by empowerment. The janitor approached him, a tentative smile breaking across her face. "I never thought we'd get this far," she whispered. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just get this far, you helped lead it. Courage isn't about never fearing, it's about standing despite fear, and you all did that today." The store, once a battlefield, now buzzed with quiet determination. Broken shelves were repaired, files reorganized, and employees walked with a newfound sense of ownership. The CEO knew the struggle against corruption and abuse would continue, but for the first time, there was a structure, a community, and a sense of empowerment strong enough to resist any tyranny. As he surveyed the aisles, the employees, and the rebuilt system, the CEO understood a fundamental truth. Leadership was not about controlling others. It was about giving them the tools, courage, and support to reclaim their own power. The battle had been won in the aisles, but the war for justice extended far beyond these walls. And yet, in that moment, hope burned brighter than fear. The employees had seen a tyrant fall, experienced courage firsthand, and now possessed the knowledge that they could protect themselves and each other. The first step toward lasting justice had been taken, and the CEO knew that as long as they stood together, no force of fear could ever dominate them again. The store had been reclaimed, systems rebuilt, and employees empowered, but the CEO knew the battle extended far beyond these walls. Corruption didn't end in one location. It was a network, a shadowy web stretching across regional branches, hidden behind paperwork, enforcers, and managers who thrived on fear. Today's victories were monumental, but vigilance was mandatory. Reports began to pour in anomalies in payroll, falsified HR complaints, and unreported incidents from other stores. The CEO reviewed each one meticulously, tracing patterns of abuse and manipulation. "This is bigger than we thought," he muttered, voice low but firm. "The system is still sick, and it has roots everywhere, but fear ends wherever I stand." He called a meeting with the newly empowered employees. The janitor, once trembling, now stood tall, flanked by the cashier, stockroom worker, and night shift clerk. "We've done something incredible here," the CEO began, "but there are others out there suffering as we did. If we want true change, we have to act, and act decisively." The employees exchanged nervous glances, but the courage instilled by the CEO leadership had taken root. They nodded, ready to follow him beyond the familiar aisles into the unknown, prepared to confront corruption wherever it lingered. Suddenly, an alert flashed on the security system. A regional enforcer, previously unknown, had arrived at the store, likely responding to the chaos of the past few days. He was large, imposing, and clearly trained to intimidate. The CEO eyes narrowed. "So the storm begins," he murmured. "We finish this." The enforcer charged through the entrance, muscles coiled, eyes scanning for weakness. Employees tensed, some instinctively stepping back, but the CEO moved forward with calm precision. "Stop," he commanded, voice cutting through the tension. The enforcer hesitated, a fraction too long, and the CEO seized the moment. A swift, fluid motion disarmed the enforcer, redirecting his momentum into a shelving unit. Cans toppled, glass cracked, and the room erupted with controlled chaos. Employees, inspired by his actions, began assisting, blocking exits, securing corners, and ensuring no one else could be harmed. The enforcer, realizing brute force alone would not succeed, attempted to rally reinforcements from other regional locations. The CEO anticipated the move, accessing communication systems and cutting off any external support. "You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and outmatched," he said calmly. "Your reign of fear ends now." Meanwhile, hidden within the backroom, a manager attempted a last-ditch effort to regain control, wielding intimidation over employees with threats of termination and reprisals. The CEO entered swiftly, intercepting and neutralizing the threat. "You've been exposed," he said, voice steady but commanding. "No more hiding, no more lies. Every act of oppression is being recorded, every employee empowered, every system restored." Employees, emboldened by the CEO presence, began confronting the remaining rogue managers and enforcers. One by one, the threats were neutralized, restrained not just by the CEO physical intervention, but by the collective courage of the workforce. The janitor led a group to secure evidence. The cashier guided new employees through reporting protocols, and the night shift clerk monitored security systems, ensuring no surprise attacks could succeed. Even as they reclaimed control, the CEO remained aware that this was a single battle in a larger war. Regional networks still plotted, hidden managers still manipulated, and enforcers still lingered, waiting for fear to return. But today had proven something critical. Courage, unity, and truth could overcome any tyranny, even one embedded in systemic corruption. By the end of the confrontation, the regional enforcer was neutralized, rogue managers accounted for, and employees fully empowered to defend themselves and the system. The store, once a symbol of oppression, now radiated resilience, courage, and justice. The CEO surveyed the aisles, broken shelves, and scattered files now replaced with signs of order and empowerment. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "Corruption will always try to rise, but so will courage. And wherever it rises, we will stand, unyielding, to confront it." The employees, once afraid and silenced, now walked with purpose. They were not just survivors, they were guardians of justice, proof that leadership rooted in courage could transform even the darkest spaces. A fire had been lit that would not be extinguished. The CEO knew the next moves would be even more challenging, but the foundation had been set. Fear no longer ruled, empowerment, truth, and courage had taken its place. And as the store settled into quiet vigilance, one thing was certain. Tyranny could hide, but it could not survive when confronted with relentless determination. The CEO knew that winning a single store was only the beginning. The corruption was systemic, networked across regional branches, and if left unchecked, it would resurface. He gathered his team employees who had now transformed into a core of empowered warriors. The janitor, once trembling, now stood at the forefront, a symbol of resilience. The young cashier, confident and unwavering, checked the recovered files. Even the stockroom worker, quiet and observant, now held command over documenting evidence for future battles. "We've reclaimed this space," the CEO said, voice steady, eyes scanning each face, "but the system stretches further. Other branches are suffering in silence, and it's our responsibility to extend justice to them. Courage cannot stay contained. Fear cannot remain unchallenged." A map of the region lay on a table, dotted with locations marked in red, branches where reports of abuse, harassment, and embezzlement had come in. Each mark represented lives disrupted, employees oppressed, and managers exploiting authority. The CEO gaze lingered on each location, calculating, strategizing. The plan was simple in principle but dangerous in execution. They would strike, expose, and reclaim one branch at a time. The team prepared meticulously. Communications were encrypted, evidence compiled, and movement coordinated. The janitor, guiding employees through the logistics of filing and reporting, became a leader in her own right. The cashier trained new recruits in document verification, while the stockroom worker ensured surveillance and evidence tracking were flawless. Together, they became a force multiplier, the backbone of a movement that promised not just recovery, but lasting reform. The first branch they approached was heavily guarded, its rogue managers aware that something was stirring. The CEO arrival was deliberate. He did not rush in blindly. Instead, he surveyed the perimeter, identifying patterns in the enforcers' movements, understanding weaknesses, and noting employee areas that had been systematically exploited. This intelligence would be crucial. Inside, the employees worked under constant pressure. The CEO led small, precise confrontations. One enforcer lunged toward a cashier, attempting to report a payroll discrepancy. A calculated interception redirected the enforcer, using momentum against him, disarming not just the physical threat but the psychological hold he had over employees. Another manager attempted to intimidate the janitor with threats of termination. Calmly, the CEO stepped in, exposing prior records of abuse and holding up evidence for all to see. The manager faltered, confidence crumbling in real time. As the day progressed, the pattern repeated. Each act of aggression by enforcers or managers was countered with precise strategy and calculated action. Employees, once silenced by fear, began to intervene, guiding colleagues to safety, exposing hidden malpractices, and reclaiming their spaces. Courage rippled through the branch, each act building momentum, dismantling layers of oppression. By evening, the branch was effectively reclaimed. Managers were either held accountable or removed, enforcers neutralized, and employees empowered to enforce fairness independently. But the CEO knew that these victories, though significant, were merely steps in a larger campaign. Regional networks still lurked in shadowed offices, ready to attempt intimidation, and systemic corruption required sustained oversight. He convened the team once more, reviewing evidence, preparing strategies, and ensuring lessons from each branch would inform the next. Every victory matters, he reminded them. Every employee empowered, every act of corruption exposed, brings us closer to a system that cannot be broken. As night fell, the team rested briefly, aware that tomorrow they would advance to another location. They had seen the power of courage in action, witnessed fear crumble, and discovered the potency of leadership grounded in truth and empowerment. But there was no time to celebrate. The war for justice extended far beyond the aisles of one store, and the CEO vision demanded relentless pursuit. The janitor, looking out over the city from the branch's rooftop, whispered, "I never imagined we could do this, that we could change everything." The CEO placed a hand on her shoulder, gaze firm. "You already are. Courage isn't inherited, it's awakened, and today it has awakened in all of us." The fire they had ignited was no longer confined to one building or one team. It was spreading, growing, and soon, every branch, every corner of the system would feel its heat. The regional network of oppression would face a reckoning unlike anything it had ever imagined. The dawn broke over the city, light spilling across glass buildings and quiet streets, reflecting a new beginning. For months, the CEO had waged a relentless campaign, not against faceless corporations, but against fear itself, corruption hidden in the shadows, and tyranny disguised as authority. Today, the final chapter of the store's battle would unfold, but its impact would ripple far beyond these walls. He stood at the entrance of the regional headquarters, the team he had nurtured beside him, once trembling employees now transformed into warriors of justice. The janitor led the way, her eyes fierce, holding a stack of files that documented months of abuse. The young cashier, steady and confident, carried evidence of payroll manipulation and HR fraud. The stockroom worker, meticulous and vigilant, oversaw the mapping of every hidden network. Together, they were more than a team. They were a force capable of toppling a system built on fear. Inside, the regional managers had convened, sensing that the CEO campaign had reached its climax. Enforcers gathered, tense, muscular, and ready to enforce control. But for the first time, confidence faltered in their eyes. They had faced his precision, his strategy, and witnessed the courage of the employees firsthand. The CEO, however, knew complacency could be fatal. Even small cracks could reignite fear. The first confrontation erupted in the main hall. An enforcer lunged toward a young employee attempting to deliver evidence. The CEO moved like lightning, swift, controlled, and unstoppable. The enforcer stumbled, redirected into a column, the sound of impact echoing through the building. Employees who had once hidden behind desks now stepped forward, guiding colleagues, securing exits, and confronting managers with undeniable proof of wrongdoing. Courage had become contagious, unrelenting, unstoppable. The regional managers, realizing the tide had turned, attempted a last-ditch maneuver, manipulation through HR policies, threats of termination, and intimidation aimed at key employees. The CEO intercepted, exposing each deception with meticulous precision. Evidence displayed on screens, emails projected for all to see, pay discrepancies laid bare, the entire network of abuse illuminated under the harsh light of truth. One by one, their arguments crumbled, their power dissolved, and their influence evaporated. Employees began taking initiative independently, implementing the systems the CEO had taught them. Reporting channels were secured, surveillance monitored, and accountability enforced, not by fear, but by empowered, vigilant teams. Each step the CEO had taken, each act of courage instilled, multiplied across the regional network. Tyranny found no foothold. Then came the final showdown in the executive wing. The CEO faced the head enforcer and the last rogue manager together. Muscle met precision. Strategy confronted intimidation. The CEO movements were deliberate, calculated. Every push, block, and redirection designed to neutralize without unnecessary harm. Employees flanked the duo, ready to act if needed, demonstrating that the collective courage of the team now matched his own formidable skill. The head enforcer attempted a final strike, aiming to instill fear, but the CEO anticipated, intercepted, and redirected, sending him sprawling across the floor. The rogue manager, desperate and exposed, lunged for the CEO, only to be halted mid-step by the janitor, holding evidence that sealed his fate. The room fell silent, a mixture of awe, tension, and disbelief. Authority had shifted, fear had been dismantled, truth had triumphed. The CEO gaze swept across the room. "This ends now," he declared. Every act of abuse, every system built on intimidation, every lie told to control others. Exposed, dismantled, and replaced. You have choices, rebuild honestly or leave. The era of fear is over. Employees, once victims, now champions of justice, stepped forward to implement reforms. The payroll was corrected, HR channels secured, enforcers held accountable. Training programs were established, ensuring that no employee could ever be silenced again. Courage was now institutionalized, empowerment codified into the very system that had once oppressed them. Outside the building, sunlight bathed the streets, reflecting off glass and steel, symbolic of clarity, hope, and renewal. Employees emerged, heads held high, steps confident. They had faced months of fear, intimidation, and manipulation, and had survived, strengthened, transformed. The janitor smiled, the cashier nodded proudly, and even the stockroom worker allowed a rare grin to break through. Together, they had witnessed the fall of tyranny and the rise of empowerment. The CEO looked on quietly, satisfaction tempered by vigilance. "This is the beginning, not the end," he murmured. "Corruption will always seek to rise, but courage, unity, and truth will always counter it. Today, you've seen that, and now you are that force." As the sun reached its zenith, the store, once a battlefield, now symbolized hope, resilience, and unwavering justice. Broken shelves repaired, files reorganized, and empowered employees stood ready. Tyranny had been confronted, fear dismantled, and truth elevated. In the quiet moments that followed, the janitor approached the CEO. "I never imagined we could do this, that we could really change everything." He smiled, hand on her shoulder, eyes steady. You already have. Courage isn't inherited, it's awakened, and today it awakened in all of you. Never forget that. The final scene lingered over the employees standing tall, a collective of bravery and resilience. Fear had been conquered, oppression had been dismantled, courage had triumphed. The CEO, surveying the transformed system, understood the ultimate truth. Leadership is not control, it is empowerment, it is awakening, and it is the relentless pursuit of justice. And as the camera of imagination would linger on the rooftop, sunlight bathing determined faces below, one thing was clear. Tyranny may rise, corruption may hide, but courage, undaunted, unwavering, unstoppable, would always prevail.